Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'm going to do a video that has nothing to do with the winter festive period, and I just wanted to jump back into BookTube because I have been absent again. I haven't really been reading I haven't really finished a lot of books. Since I last spoke to you, I read 6 books, the first of which was The Fell by Sarah Moss. I was really looking forward to this one because I loved Ghostwall, and this one was interesting to me because it takes place during the pandemic, and I think it really lives in that space.
Hi, just butting in because I'm not always the best at giving a little synopsis of what the books are that I'm reading before going into my thoughts about them. But The Fell is a novella, and I don't want to give too much of it away because it's such a short story. But basically, this woman is in quarantine until she can't take it anymore, and she goes for a walk on the fells in the Peak District of the UK, which is an area that I'm familiar with. It's fairly near me, and I've been to the Peak District on hikes and things like that often. And so a lot of that was very relatable to me as well. But she breaks quarantine to go on this walk, and things don't go very well, and then there is basically a missing person case. But I wouldn't call it a thriller at all. And you're seeing from her perspective, her son's perspective, her neighbor's perspective, and the search and rescue man's perspective. I think those are the only ones. And I think that's all you really need to know going into it. I don't know if the book says more than that, but that's a little synopsis.
I think because Sarah Moss does such a great job with that internal voice that she gives each of her characters, it's still something that feels very immersive and like a book that you can really connect strongly with, especially since we all broadly experienced the pandemic we had similar things affect us, obviously to different levels for different people, but there was widespread feelings of isolation. There was a lot of feeling about our relation to other people. And even though the specifics of that is different, I think there was a lot in here that could be globally related to. But at the same time, for me, in a way, something about it being part of that time made it feel a little bit weird reading in this time. And that's not to say that the things that we faced during the pandemic are completely gone now, and you know, we can still put ourselves in that place, but I think that reading this during the pandemic would have hit even harder than it did me reading it now. After that, I picked up Playing to the Gallery by Grayson, and this has been on my list for a very long time. I actually did not know when I picked it up that it was originally a series of lectures that was broadcast on the radio, and the book is just like the transcript of that. So luckily I listened to this on audiobook, and it is I guess as close to that experience of being there live or listening to it on the radio as it was originally disseminated. This series of lectures looks at art, what it is, its value, and all of those things, and the discussion was very interesting to me on a few different levels. Firstly, I find that Grayson Perry's way of talking feels very familiar to me because it's very similar to the way that my dad speaks and his communication style, and so immediately that felt familiar and like I could engage very closely with what was being said, and in a way where, like, if I'm talking to my dad, I can just like butt in or disagree with things and whatnot, and it doesn't feel to me like someone from on high is telling me all of the stuff that I have to accept necessarily, which was an interesting dynamic for me with listening to this. But also I think the process of listening to other people's look at the art space, and specifically the gallery space, and all of the discussion that is to be had there about worth and what counts as art and the value of it and all of those things. I find that discussion very interesting, and I felt like there was a lot that I agreed with in this book. But at the same time, as Grayson Perry was discussing, he kind of puts himself out there as like he will throw out things that are meant to be disagreed with sometimes, I think, and sometimes he can be a little bit cheeky, and I think it's a little bit defensive the way that he sometimes like throws things out there flippantly. And I could sense that even though I broadly agreed with pretty much everything that he said, I could also sense in certain things that he just briefly touched on or didn't mention that there would also be things that I would disagree with him with, probably strongly, in certain areas of our perspectives on art and the art world. Funny thing about this is that I happened to read this book not long before my friends and I visited the gallery space that was showing the nominees for the Turner Prize, the winner of which was announced 2 days ago. But I think having Grayson Perry, who has also won the Turner Prize in the past, sort of talk through things to do with that space, that art space, was it really interesting to have in my head going through these nominees and then having that discussion with my friends who are also like in that art world. It would be interesting to do a video on that, but I think I'll probably, I don't know, make some notes and put that on my Patreon or something like that, because I don't think it has wide appeal interest, I guess. After that, I read Feral by George Monbiot, and I very much respect George Monbiot, but I realized that all of my understanding of his perspective on various different topics comes from his writing as a columnist for The Guardian and not from any books that I've read by him, even though they've been on my list for a long time. So I finally picked this one up. And funnily enough, the month before I read The Lost Flock by Jane Cooper, and she had a very poor opinion of George Monbiot. She really doesn't like him, and I thought that was interesting. Ultimately, I still feel like I am more towards being a fan of George Monbiot than not. I think that if what she said in her book about his insensitivity to farmers and whatnot, and the wording that he used and stuff, if that is true, then I think that that is a little tone deaf of him. But at the same time, I think that there is still the issue where we do have too many sheep, and I've read a few sheep books recently, as you know, and I've just got into knitting and everything like that, so it's not as if I think that sheep shouldn't exist or anything, but I think that the arguments that he's making about the way that they are damaging the countryside is valid and needs to be addressed. And I think that Jane Cooper's book, she seems to sort of ignore the fact that there are also a lot of irresponsible farmers. But anyway, all of that is beside the point. I read Feral and it wasn't exactly the book that I thought it was going to be. That said, I didn't do a lot of research ahead of time to confirm what it was in the first place. And I think that is the case from when I'm seeing lots of other people's reviews about it as well. So I would say that this book is largely a memoir, very focused on George Monbiot himself and his personal adventures, I guess. And it's less so what I think is tagged on the cover or somewhere, where it's kind of acting as though it's going to reconnect you with nature in this sort of personal journey sort of way. It is much more of a memoir in pieces, I guess, with some other little learning bits about nature, and then like his adventures in the UK and outside of the UK at different points in time, which is not really what I was picking it up to be. So I don't know, it didn't annoy me like it seems to have many other people that I've seen review this book. But at the same time, it didn't really do anything for me, so I don't have a lot to say about it in that respect. But I will almost definitely be picking up more books by George Monbiot that are more what I was after in the first place, to do with, I guess, his assessment of our handling of the environment, and more of a like assessment of the situation rather than that personal memoir piece in future. Then I picked up Money Talks by Ellie Austin Williams, and I think you can sort of see this book as the Financial Diet but UK version, and slightly less, I don't know, in-depth and punchy than that in a way to me. For me, this was overall a very good book that does try to get a little bit deeper than the surface level stuff, and to be intersectional in how it's approaching talking to people about money, talking to young millennial women really about money. At the same time though, I felt like some of the little interviews with people didn't work super well for me. It felt almost like at some points you had an individual telling their story and that was almost representative of everyone. Like, I know that that's how that functions in this type of nonfiction book. Like, you are, I don't know, telling the stats of a certain thing and then you use this personal story to illustrate that. I get that, but it felt at places more like you had an individual who had an experience that I think wasn't necessarily representative of the broader demographic that they're in, but it was almost being set up as though it was at some points, and that only happened like maybe twice, so I don't want to like act like that is how the whole book was or anything, but it did flag for me, so I just wanted to throw that out there. And it is worth knowing that obviously this is for a British audience, so it deals mostly with that, and then does also mention the US, because you can't be alive in the world today without mentioning the US, as they are ever present and affect everyone else in the world pretty much. Maybe if you were like living in China, your whole world would be completely differently focused, and so you could write, you know, broadly about something and completely ignore the US, even though it does still affect everyone. Anyway, that's an aside. I would recommend this book to young women looking to get a handle on their perspectives about money, sort of to get insight into contexts that they might not be taking into consideration when doing certain types of planning, or when confused about how other people are doing the things that they're doing, or just like wanting an idea of the sorts of things they need to be planning for, thinking about going forward, setting up their independent lives, things like that. So I think this was a useful book, but at the same time I think that I have enough information on this on the topics that this touched on, that it didn't give me a lot of new things new things to think about necessarily, but it, I think, is a solid book for people new to the topic of personal finance and wanting to look into that as particularly as young women. Then I picked up Slow Productivity by Newport, and I think I was looking forward to this a little bit more than I was when I approached his other book, Digital Minimalism, because with digital minimalism I kind of expected that to be a bit of like productivity bro nonsense, and then it ended up being actually quite helpful in a lot of ways and very interesting, and to bring up some interesting topics and be very practical in a way that I really could appreciate. This, however, felt like largely just filler for me, so I was pleasantly surprised by the last book, and then that made me raise my expectations beyond where I think I should have in approaching this book. And that's not to say that there's not like little nuggets that might be helpful to people, and I think as well, if you just enjoy being in the world of like looking at approaching things differently such that you're not flirting with burnout all the time, this might be helpful for that. But for me, I think it didn't really add anything to my life. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anyone, and there are other books that I would recommend ahead of this for that same purpose. And then the last book that I finished since the period that I disappeared was Expert by Roger Kneebone, and I really liked certain aspects of this book. I don't know if it was super engaging necessarily, and I felt like a lot of it at times felt kind of repetitive, but I do find that since finishing that book I have been referencing it a lot and mentioning things to people from that book, so that is definitely the marker for me of a book that has given me a lot of value, when I'm like constantly referencing it or telling people about this thing that I learned in such and such a book. And I think mostly what this book did for me is that I am in a period where I am really wanting to explore the idea of craftsmanship and what it is to be an artisan, and the arts in a more hands-on sort of way. And I think this idea of being an expert and developing that expertise and what goes into that specifically, not so much the material part of what goes into being an expert and the repetition and all of that stuff, or the talent or whatever else, but more so the cognitive practices and the more ephemeral stuff that goes into what it means to be an expert, because you can do things a million times and just keep doing them in the same way and doing them wrong, and then you can do things lots of times and learn from each time and build on that and go towards I don't know, a sort of refinement of that thing, and have that practice really lead to something different than just I don't know, just the repetition of it. Like there's something else that is added there, and I was kind of hoping that this book would start to explore a little bit of that, and I guess it did. But I think this is also part of a broader piece that I am investigating at the moment, and I think that's building to something, so hopefully I'll do a broader video about that craftsmanship piece that I'm sort of researching and playing with casually at the moment. That's all of the books that I read, and I'm currently reading a few books at the moment. I'm reading Agnes Grey, which will be my first Brönte book, and that felt like obligatory considering that I'm living in West Yorkshire, like that it's like Brönte country, you know? So I really feel like I've done myself a bit of a disservice by only getting to them now. And I'm doing that as a kind of a buddy read with my mum, and we're hoping to go visit Haworth after we finish reading the book, or maybe during our reading of the book, I don't know, but my mum's coming over for the winter break, and so we're gonna visit where the Brontes grew up, and we'll both either be finished with or in the middle of reading at our first Brönte book together. And then I have on audiobook and in physical copy Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. I kind of like the style of this sort of irreverent older woman rambling about things that are important to her, but she is devalued in society. And I don't know, it's an interesting little read, but I don't, at the moment it feels like I'm not sure where this is leading to, but I do kind of enjoy being in her head, even though, yeah, I don't know where it's going. And then I have just on audiobook The Frayed Atlantic Edge and How Migration Really Works. But that's all for my reading recently, and I hope you have a wonderful winter break, whether that's celebrating anything, doing anything festive, or just taking a break from work, hopefully. Or if you're working through it, then I hope that things go smoothly and it's not a pain in the butt. That's all for now though, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.